Hi, Founder fans, Jason here, and today we're going to be talking about steam power during the American Revolution. Now, I know it's not always something we associate steam power and the Revolution. Usually, when we think of steam power, we think of the steam engines that are more common on trains in the mid 1800s through the cowboy era and this and that. However, steam power developed before that. In fact, steam power developed about 60 years before the American Revolution over in England. A gentleman named Thomas Savery was the first one to use commercially steam power. Now, these first engines were actually developed for mining because when you were digging in a mine, sometimes water would get in and the mine would fill up with water and you either had to leave or drown. So the first steam engines were developed to pump water out of mines. And the thing is, the British knew they were onto something with steam power, and they were very close-lipped about letting the instructions on how to build a steam engine out of Britain. In fact, there were laws prohibiting people from taking the instructions and the blueprints of a steam engine out of Britain. Now, this didn't work 100%, and eventually it does happen. There's several people who come over to the colonial United States, including a gentleman named Josiah Hornblower, who goes to northern New Jersey and starts building steam engines for mines and such in that part of the world. Now, the American Revolution takes place. There's not a lot of development in the steam engine, but some people are aware that there's more we can do with this. It's an engine. And some people said, hey, maybe we can power boats. And there were several gentlemen who actually did build steam-powered boats throughout the 1780s. And in fact, one gentleman, John Finch, even demonstrated in front of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention. Now, after the Constitution was written and the United States came into power, well, certain people applied for patents. Now, there's two things to note. First of all, the American Revolution kind of comes about right at the end of the Enlightenment and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And the founders knew this. In fact, the Friday before the Constitutional Convention met, a gentleman named Tench Tillman gave a speech in front of both the Pennsylvania and Virginia delegations to the convention. And he speaks a lot about manufacturers. He's a close friend of Alexander Hamilton, who had the same ideas of promoting manufacturers in the United States. And he actually, in his speech, uses the words steam power to the delegates to the convention. And then, like I said, later on that same summer, John Finch would demonstrate a steam-powered boat to these men. Now, after the Constitution is created, people want monopolies. Many people before this had been granted monopolies intentionally by state governments so that they could make a profit off an invention or an idea they had. Usually it was geared towards canals, but at this point, certain gentlemen were trying to get it for steam-powered engines. But once the Constitution comes into play, now you need to go to the federal government for this kind of thing, and they all do. And four people, the aforementioned John Finch, Nathaniel Reed, John Stevens III, and James Rumsey all go immediately to the new Congress and essentially say, patent please. And Congress doesn't know exactly what to do. Washington and the administration don't know exactly what to do. So that the steam power is really the main reason they end up creating the patent office in the United States government. Now, the Constitution does issue the federal government the right to grant patents, but there wasn't a specific office. There was no really way to go about it, but they had to create the patent office to put together some kind of commission to oversee these competing claims to steam power. And all four of these men, there were actually five men, but the other guy didn't really have an engine, so we don't count him. All four of these men wanted a monopoly in the United States for steam power. Now, none of them got it. In fact, what happened was the patent office decided instead of just choosing one of these four guys to give a patent for steamboats, they decided to give all four of them patents on their particular design of steamboats. Now, side note, this is very important to the history of America because even today, patents are the slightest difference can have a patent. That's why you have Apple iPhones and Android phones. They're both touchscreen small phones with an operating system, but they are different operating systems, and the screens and the phones operate just a little bit differently, and therefore they may have separate patents. Same thing with car manufacturers. Same thing with everything in your life. It is essentially a little bit really similar to, but a little bit different than something else. And it's that little difference that permits them to have a separate patent. And that was all because of what I like to call the Steam Wars. It was this arms race to be the first person to build a working steam engine in the United States. Now, I do want to pop over here to the website Founders Online, the founders.archives.gov. Shout out to them. This is a letter to Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson from Tobias Lear, who was George Washington's personal secretary. And it's a brief note that says, here are the lists of the people that have received patents. Because as Secretary of State, it was Thomas Jefferson's really job to oversee the patents. Now, right here, I just want to show you real quick what we're talking about here. First of all, there's a gentleman named Engelbert Cruz, who I did not mention earlier. He who is permitted to, he had certain improvements to Savory's engine. Thomas Savory is the gentleman I mentioned earlier who built the first engine. Now, this is primarily geared towards pumps, like Savory's original invention was. But here we have James Rumsey, who is, has several ones, some for a mill and things like that, but improvements to Savory's engine for raising water by steam, okay? New modes of generating steam, and for, most importantly, discovery of propelling boats through the water by the reaction of steam, and some other specifics about how he reacts to steam, because there were more specific information on each individual patent. Now you have Nathan Reed, one for improving boiler in a steam engine and improving the art of distillery. Now his steam engine also went for boats. It's not specified here. John Stevens Jr. For applying steam to a bellows, which again, we have a guy up here playing with bellows with the steam. And for, again, improving Savory's engine. They seem exactly the same, but they're not. They are very minute differences. And again, John Fitch for improving in a steamboat. So I'll just bring myself back up here. I just wanted to show you that letter because they're essentially getting patents on exactly the same thing, but there are little tiny differences. And again, those have wide-ranging effects on the history of the United States. And most importantly, the effect was it halted steam production. Because suddenly, these guys couldn't really make money. They needed the monopoly from the federal government to really make a profit. They all individually had sunk lots and lots and lots of money into their steam engines. But when they could not make a substantial profit from said steam engines, well, it didn't seem worth it spending that much time. Now, to be fair, all of these gentlemen continued inventing, and all of these gentlemen continued to invest their time in it, but it never really took off until 25, almost 30 years later, when Robert Livingston, the longtime Chancellor of New York, an important American revolutionary who was delegate to the Continental Congress on the Committee of Five that was charged with drafting the Declaration of Independence, he ends up going to France, making the Louisiana Purchase, and comes back with a friend he made in France, Robert Fulton, who had his own steam engine on a boat. And it is with Robert Livingston's funds and his ability to help Fulton get a monopoly in the state of New York on the Hudson River that really turns the Robert Fulton's boat into the first successful steam engine. What's really interesting is this steam engine shows up, and after that they decided to start building the Erie Canal. They'd already been talking about the Erie Canal, but now that there's a steam engine, like, all right, we can do something serious with the Erie Canal. And the aforementioned John Stevens III, who was one of the four men to get a patent for a steamboat, he goes to New York and says, hey, no, don't build a canal. We should start building trains with these. And everyone's like, what are you talking about? Yada, yada, yada. Now, he would end up building, John Stevens would end up building really the first successful train. I think it's the Perth Amboy train down in Maryland, if I'm not mistaken. And he ends up, this guy who got one of the first steamboat patents ends up being one of the first steam train builders. And he tries to stop the Erie Canal and says, hey, you're going to want trains through here. And I'll be honest, as someone who lives in central New York, I will point out that the Erie Canal was very important for a while, but it was finished in the 1920s, and then trains ran through 15 years later anyway. Although I don't want to take too much away from the Erie Canal. But I just wanted to make this video because I've been reading a lot about steam power at the time, and it's often overlooked that, the nascent, the birth of steam power in the United States came alongside the revolution. Like I said, that letter I showed you before was from George Washington's personal assistant to Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson, just to put a perspective on the idea that the founders knew these technologies existed and they knew they were growing, and it is something they considered when they wrote the Constitution and when they assembled the first United States government. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, definitely hit like and subscribe for a new video 5-6 days a week. I usually make it about a more specific founder, but this is a lot of fun and I thought I'd talk about it. So I hope you enjoyed, and I'll be back with a new founder for you tomorrow.